everyone. My name is Rachel. I am a public health nurse at the Brant County Health Unit and project lead for what you're here for tonight. I'd like to say welcome and thank you for being here. This is the Drugs in Youth, What Adults Need to Know mini-series, and it's our first session. So very exciting. We're starting things off, and we're super excited to continue it throughout this fall. It's been quite some time for us to sit in person together comfortably. A conference like this, it's a great feeling to all be back in the room and get started. In a few short months, this project has come together, and it's follow-up from recommendations from our 2019 Substances and Youth Forum. So we're so happy to bring this back, and we've innovated and really recreated it into a mini-series where we can dive deep into our content and something for you to enjoy, and something our community really needs. Various community partners here tonight, all in the white lanyards, have been deeply involved in creating this for us tonight, so I can't thank them enough for bringing this to life. And we are thankful that you're not only spending one evening with us, but hopefully you're attending all 5 sessions. Tonight, I would like to acknowledge that here at the Civic Center, we are on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people. Brantford is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. The contributions and historic importance of the Haudenosaunee must also be clearly and overtly connected to the collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, with focused attention on bringing about justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across the country. This Friday, September 30th, marks the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and Orange Shirt Day. This day honors children who have never returned home and survivors of the residential schools, as well as their families and communities. This day of recognition and awareness highlights the resilience in the Indigenous communities. You are soon to hear the word resilience and what that means. We would like to acknowledge the resilience of the 6 Nations communities that have lived, loved, and endured here forever. As adults, we are here tonight to learn and educate ourselves. This will help support and nurture our children and youth in positive ways to build resilience and heal from issues associated with substance use in our community. On September 30th, we encourage all members of the community to wear orange to honor the thousands of survivors of residential schools. So, what is this mini-series that you're here for tonight? You know, a 5-day mini-series where we can speak more in depth and we can enjoy a nice Strode's dinner. As a community, we are a team. We're here to break down the stigma, the misperceptions, fears, and myths of substance use, while bringing to life this opportunity for knowledge exchange. Throughout all 5 sessions, we will unpack the continuum of substance use, and our goal is to provide you with knowledge and take-home skills that you can apply in your lives with youth that you engage with at home or in your professional settings. I hope you each had a chance to browse the community marketplace, speak to our various community partners, and see how they can support you in our community. The marketplace will reopen after the speaking session for a chance to engage if you did not get a chance to on your way in. For those of you attending virtually, we'll be sending a directory of our vendors out and some online resources so you don't miss the full opportunity of attending the mini-series. Sorry we can't send you any of our lovely Strode's dinner tonight. After our keynote speaking, we'll have a short break, and then we will do a question and answer panel with our community expertise, opportunity to ask questions. Please feel free to record your questions as the presentation goes out. There's Q&A ballots on your table. We'll go around and collect those. There's also an evaluation form in your registration packages that you can fill out at the end of the event. And for our virtual attendees, there will be a link sent to you after the session tonight. This evaluation will be for us to gather some feedback for our further sessions. So, tonight's session is titled Building Meaningful Connections with Youth, and to get our brains engaged, I would like to welcome my colleague, Laura Fretz, to start us off with an icebreaker. Laura is a public health nurse at the Brant County Health Unit and has worked very closely with me and the rest of our planning table to bring this event to life. So I cannot thank her enough for all the support she's given me tonight. So a warm welcome for Laura.
Hello and welcome. I'm so happy to see that you have taken some time out of your very busy days and schedules to join us here to kick off the beginning of the 5-part mini-series. I know you have very busy lives, but this is an important subject, and you've decided to spend your time with us today, and we hope and our plan is that you will learn some things to help fill your buckets in your lives. So, one of the things that I would like to ask you to do, this is just a little warm-up activity. There will be no role-playing. What I'd like to ask you to do is I'd like to ask you to just reflect and think about someone in your life, maybe from a long time ago, maybe from now, that was significant or is significant to you. Somebody that made you feel safe. Somebody that it didn't matter if you had a great day or a bad day, you knew you were welcome. There would be no issues with how you were that day. It was just a great space to be in. So think about someone that you're connected with, a friend, a family, a colleague, a neighbor, and think about that person and how they made you feel. That's part 1. Part 2 is I'd like to ask you to take a minute and with some of the papers that you received in your agenda kits, write down what did they say or what did they do that gave you those feelings. What was it exactly that that person did that made you feel safe and okay to have a conversation about anything without judgment? So this is where the homework begins. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to percolate on that. And for our friends who are watching from home, I'm sure you're doing the activity as well, and there is a chat box. So when I get to the part 3 of this, we would welcome you to send in your submissions of what it was that made you feel safe and welcomed with that person, what they did or what they said. If you can send that to us, we would really like to hear from you. So just for our audience, just so that you know, we have about 100 people online at home who are also watching. And as you know, Rogers has set up in the back of the room, and they are filming so that we can maintain the learning from each part of the mini-series, and we hope to have that posted, and we will advertise where it will be posted, and so that we can access this at a later time. So just if you're wondering about the cameras. Okay, so now part 3. Would anyone like to share, without sharing names or connections of identity, what it was that you experienced with that person that made you feel so great? Do we have any brave volunteers who will share with us? What did the person say or do that made you feel great? We can just popcorn it out. Any brave souls? Yes.
Welcomed me into their home, gave me a hug, asked me how I was, asked me how I was doing, listened to what I had to say, was invested in my communication with them.
That's great, and thank you so much for sharing that with us today. That's perfect. Welcoming into your home, a hug, connections. They say, "How are you?" and they really wait to hear the answer. They want to know what's going on. That's terrific. Thank you so much. Anybody else share what someone did or said that made you feel good? Yes, right. Yes, sir, right there.
Chris.
I can only think of my mother. I think when I was younger, I used to come home intoxicated after a late night of partying and drinking. And I'd pass out on the couch and she would take a blanket and tuck me in and just shake her head and say, honey, why do you do this to yourself all the time? No matter what I did, she was always there to support me somehow, to put things into perspective. You know, if you're lost, you don't know, you don't have any short or long-term goals. I'll never forget her turning to me at the dinner table one night and saying, pointing at me and say, you go out and find your career and get settled, and then you can go out and find your partner for life. So those are just little things that stick with me until the day that I die, that you know, keep me focused and on the right path.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That support, right? Unconditional support with you in your relationship. Amazing. Good stuff. And yes,
Reassured me, told me that she was proud of me and believed in me.
powerful words, right? That's great. When someone believes in you and supports you, how awesome is that? Great. Do I have any others? I know it's hard. And you're shy. Oh, yes.
Just for that time, a short time, it would take away whatever responsibilities were weighing on me. Like if you're going somewhere in an overwhelmed state, like whether they feed you or fill your car with gas or whatever, but whatever in that moment they could help with, right? So they take away that burden of responsibility, especially for the youth, teetering between youth and.
Nice. So they're looking out for you and supporting you. That's great. Really good. Okay. Well, this is a little bit of a hint as to where we're going to go today with our presentation, and I'll bring Rachel back up here. Where is Miss Rachel? There she is. Okay. Thank you very much for participating, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for everyone to participate. Okay, I think that's enough from us two here. To get into our keynote speaking, tonight we have the pleasure of having Dr. Tara Bruno. Oh, goodness. I'll hold it here. Dr. Tara Bruno, PhD, Associate Professor at King's University College at the University of Western Ontario, expert in addictions, mental health, and family and youth research, co-author of book The Drug Paradox, and that's the least to say. There's so much more attached to your name. Dr. Tara Bruno was our keynote speaker for the 2019 Substance and Youth Parent Forum. This time around, she's not only worked throughout her summer and research sabbatical on creating content for the mini-series, but has also contributed on the planning table with our community partners and receiving my many emails back and forth. So with my deepest gratitude, I thank you, Dr. Bruno, for your tremendous contributions and passions for this project. And for a special component to our keynote speaking, we welcome Maria Estrada as well. Maria will bring her perspectives as a youth with lived experience. Sharing a journey of experience with addiction and our mental health can be one of the most powerful and humanizing ways to pass knowledge. And I recognize this is not something easy to speak about, so we do express our greatest appreciation for having you, Maria, here tonight. Maria will also be working collaboratively with Dr. Bruno throughout the rest of the mini-series. So again, that's enough from me. So with a warm welcome, I'd like to welcome our keynote speakers, Dr. Tara Bruno and Maria Estrada. Thank you. Can you hear me out the back? Not really? Louder? All right. Is that better? All right. Well, thank you, Laura and Rachel, and welcome everyone. I'm really looking forward to this evening. It's been a long time in the making, and I'm really impressed by all of the work that the committee has done and the commitment of the people involved with this event. Not just this one, but the other ones as well. A special thanks should go to Rachel for all of her planning. I don't mind her emails. She's a master organizer, she's great at brainstorming, and she's very patient with all of us. It's not easy to pull these things off, so kudos to her for everything she's done to make this happen. And thanks to Laura for helping guide us and support Rachel with all of the planning. Both of you are quite amazing. Thanks to COVID, it's been a long while since I've been in person. I've had about 5 students show up to class on a regular basis. I guess that's what happens when you're 20 and you can choose to attend or not attend. I'm also not the greatest at hybrid, so it's not that I forget the people online, but welcome, everyone. And my skills with doing hybrid will need a little bit of refining as we go through these 5 series, I'm sure. I'm delighted to be in the same room with many other people, and equally excited that we are able to make this event available virtually for those who couldn't attend. Before we jump in, I wanted to give everyone a sense of how we are going to do things tonight, and give you an idea of the topics that we'll cover. So throughout this series of talks over the next few months, I will share some of my story and where the past few decades of research on substance use is leading us. I will draw on some of the work I've done with my colleague Rick Siernick, whose background is in social work, and the work of several other notable Canadian experts, including medical doctor and trauma expert Gabor Mate, social psychologist Bruce Alexander, and resilience expert Michael Ungar, among many others. Each step of the way, we will also hear from Maria about her lived experiences with addiction, mental illness, trauma, and resilience. Together, we hope that by sharing our knowledge and experiences, we can have a more open and informed conversation about youth and substance use and mental wellness. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about myself and some of the reasons why I think we need to shift the paradigm. When I say this, what I mean is we need to change our perspective on substance use. We need to start moving away from the moral and medical models of understanding substance use and recognize that it's not all about the individual. Essentially, we need to get more social. This isn't to say that the individual isn't a part of our understanding. It's just one aspect that we need to consider. I'll introduce you to the biopsychosocial model as a basic foundation for shifting the paradigm, and then we will revisit this model in a future session. I will then introduce you to the continuum of substance use, which is more complicated than our typical notions of using or not using. But it's pretty simple once we start to change the way that we think about use. And finally, we'll talk about the importance of fostering attachment and engagement. The earlier that we can start this, the better. We can do this through developing healthy routines and safe boundaries and setting a foundation for resilience, which is vitally important not only for our youth, but also for ourselves. So here's the bit about me and why I do what I do. Essentially, my perspective based on where I've come from and how it shapes what I do today. Professionally, Rachel's already shared some stuff, so I apologize for a bit of repetition. But I'm an associate professor at King's University College at Western University in London in the Department of Sociology. I completed my PhD in Sociology and Addiction Studies from the University of Toronto in 2012. And in 2018, my colleague Rick Siernick and I co-authored a book entitled The Drug Paradox. This is where we explore how psychoactive substances are understood and dealt with in puzzling and conflicting ways in society, which we argue is ultimately preventing us from dealing with the issue in a meaningful way. More broadly, my research and teaching focuses on at-risk youth, substance use, drug policy, drug education, and elements of resilience. Working with youth and hearing from them and educating other people through my research and teaching is my passion. Now, a little more personally, I have been doing this thing called drugs in one way or another since as long as I can remember. In fact, even as far back as when my mother smoked while she was pregnant, or when she left sleeping pills out in the bathroom and I thought they were candy, so I ate them. or when she ran me to the hospital and the ER doctors had to give me Valium during one of my intense temper tantrums. I was a real treat as a child. All of this happened by the time I was 2. So I'm sure you can probably imagine the kinds of things I was in trouble for by the time I reached adolescence. I'll have to save most of the details, just in case my youngest children end up seeing or hearing this. What I can tell you is that there's no doubt in my mind that I was the teenager that no one would have predicted would end up with a PhD, get a good job, have an amazing blended family, and 5 children. Well, they might have predicted the 5 children part, but not the rest. The point is, I had a lot of risk factors that are often identified as predictors for substance use and substance disorders, starting from the moment I entered this world. In fact, the intergenerational trauma research would suggest that it began long before I was even conceived. In my early years, I was raised by a teenage mom who came with her own set of risk factors and trauma. So much of my story is not just about me, but also about what happened to my mother and even what happened to her mother, my beloved grandmother. By the time I was 10, my mom had married, and I became the oldest sibling in a blended family, with a half-brother who's 10 years younger than me and a stepbrother who's 1 year younger than me. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, I experienced many different forms of trauma, often unknown or unrecognized by others, even to this day. You see, in my family of origin, talking to each other about our struggles and trauma was seen as a weakness, or in some ways, just me being dramatic, overly sensitive, or trivial. In my family, and especially for the women, there was an unspoken rule that we were supposed to be strong, independent, and push forward, no matter what happens. These are a set of traits I've undoubtedly passed on to my own children, for better or for worse. For many years, I was the teenager who caused my mother and my stepfather significant grief, though never intentionally. I was often in trouble at school for my defiant attitude. I like to call it the early stages of developing critical thinking and standing up for what I believe in. I experimented with substance use at a relatively young age, and I hung around with other at-risk young people, often finding myself in problematic situations. Essentially, I didn't appear to have much going for me in terms of potential success in life, especially when I myself became a teenage mom at 19. In retrospect, having my daughter at 19 probably saved my life. While some might view my adolescence as troubled or delinquent, my experiences and behaviors were pretty clear signs of resilience in the making, a topic we'll cover more in the October session. In addition to these social risk factors, I've had significant biological and psychological risk factors. One of the most memorable and impactful events was when I was 9, and I was told that my estranged biological father passed away. While some might assume that losing someone you didn't know is not that big of a deal, for me, it felt like a huge deal. There was this person who was half of me that I didn't realize existed, and I would never get the opportunity to know. I later learned that he had died by suicide, which only intensified the hurt and loss. Some days it made me angry at him and at others for what they must have done to him, but most days it just filled me with a sense of sadness and regret for him and for me. In short, it was traumatic. Gabor Mate, a retired medical doctor, trauma, addictions, and parenting expert, defines trauma as not what happens to you, but what happens inside you. Peter Levine, another leading expert on trauma and healing, further argues that trauma is about a loss of connection to ourselves, to our families, and the world around us. In short, the sadness, regret, feeling guilty for grieving someone I didn't really know, and then struggling with the lost possibility of connection was traumatic. I felt like I had lost a part of myself that I could never get back. Even though I had never had a chance to develop a relationship with my biological father, losing him impacted me and my life tremendously. Over the years, I've been told stories about him, and the one constant theme is his lifelong struggle with substance use and mental illness. But surely there was more to his story than addictions, mental illness, and his ultimate end. How did it get to that point? What happened to him? Now, on my mother's side of the family, addiction and mental illness have a pretty long history. I only know as far back as my great-grandmother, who had a lobotomy, followed by my grandparents, whom most of the family considered functioning alcoholics. While these are not appropriate terms today, they were nonetheless early parts of my vocabulary. I have aunts and uncles with a wide array of substance use disorders and clinically diagnosed mental health disorders. My one cousin is dependent on opioids and methamphetamines, and most recently, my youngest brother, with whom I share the same mom, attended residential treatment for his alcohol and other substance use in 2020. He was further diagnosed with bipolar in the summer of 2021, shortly before he experienced his first episode of psychosis. In short, I've seen and experienced some stuff. My lists of risks could go on, but we don't have enough time for all of that. And ultimately, the question that has driven my research and advocacy is what might have been different in the lives of myself and my family members if we didn't take this individualized, biological, and genetic stance on addiction and mental illness. What if we look to our experiences, our culture, and our communities for some understanding? Gabor Mate's recent book, The Myth of Normal, pushes this thinking even further when he states, our concept of well-being must move from the individual to the global in every sense of that word. Unfortunately, addiction and mental illness were normal for me growing up, and frankly, still are today. But I'm not alone. These issues have become normal for many people. More and more children, youth, and parents are struggling with mental well-being and substance use. Yet we still keep going back to the same old arguments that the individual either made poor choices or the individual has a disease. But substance use and the related disorders are adaptations to the environments we are in. It helps us feel like we belong. It masks pain. It passes time. It helps us deal with stress. It makes some people feel normal, whatever that means. Some substances can relax us, some can energize us, and some substances are widely available, culturally acceptable, and even celebrated. Instead of saying that's just who they are, or maybe we should get them some treatment, or they made bad choices, or there's not much we can do about our biology and mental health, what if people's life circumstances were different? What if, at particular moments in time, like during childhood and adolescence, young people felt supported, and that they had a meaningful contribution to make, not only in their close social relationships, but also the broader communities and societies where they live? What if the broader culture we lived within felt more supportive and nurturing and collective, rather than competitive, disconnected, and individualistic? You see, I can't change my genetics, or my children's genetics for that matter. I also can't change my past or the choices I've made. But I can alter my relationships, circumstances, and perspective. And collectively, we can also commit ourselves to learning and educating others about the ways in which we can support and engage our children, youth, and families in healthy, positive, and meaningful ways. Ultimately, we can help them build resilience to heal and thrive. In order to do this, though, we need to take a holistic approach to substance use and substance use disorders. We need to move beyond the individualized explanations and towards understanding our environments, relationships, and the culture that we're surrounded by. We must understand the social. So just to be clear here, I'm not suggesting that biology or psychology don't matter. They definitely matter. They are an important piece of the puzzle for sure. And as my colleague and addictions expert Rick Siernick would say, everything matters. Most scholars on addiction and substance use disorders now agree that we need a more holistic and compassionate understanding of what leads someone to start using in the first place and potentially continue to use to the point of social and self-destruction. My usual response when people ask me to talk to them about substance use and addiction is complicated. Probably a trauma response based on my own insecurities about feeling like I can never know enough or will never truly feel like I have mastered anything. But trauma responses aside, it has always puzzled me how contradictory our notions of substance use and substance use disorders are. So can I get a show of hands, both here and online, if you can raise the hand? Who thinks people who struggle with substance use are making a choice to use? I think you guys are lying. It's interesting. Are you sure? Yes. First choice. Yes, so even just initially starting out. All right, yeah. Now, who thinks addiction or substance use disorders are a disease? Is there any hands online? All right, so the popular belief in society and even the underpinning of most treatment programs is that individuals who engage in excessive substance use, even in the face of negative consequences, must have a disease. At the same time, there are still a significant number of people in society who moralize the issue when we claim that the individual has a choice to use. How can we simultaneously moralize and medicalize an issue? On the one hand, we blame the individual, and on the other, we're absolving them of fault. Even more troubling, we don't seem to be making any meaningful progress towards bettering people's lives. So how can we begin to suggest that this perspective is even useful? Undoubtedly, there is an intimate and complex connection between the mind, body, and society, and substance use complicates this interconnection in many ways. There is no doubt that the inclination to use and the substances that we use impact us very much, and it's about biology, physiology, neurology, pharmacology, psychology. But one thing that myself and many other scholars, including Gabor Mate, agree on is that substance use-related harms need social solutions. Medicines and various therapies, while helpful to some, have not and cannot solve the problems that we're facing. One of my favorite quotes from Mate's newest work challenges the current belief that addiction is a disease. He says, and I quote, "Who has ever heard of a disease that makes you feel normal?" Or, "When's the last time getting sick made you function better than normally?" Those words, to me, really resonated. It cannot be a disease if it makes people feel normal. It cannot be something that is a disease if it is something that we say is about being sick, but is actually making people feel better or function normally. The reasons people use substances cannot be fully understood from a moralistic or medicalized framework. Sometimes we need to completely reframe the way we look at things in order to make progress. In order to better understand why substance use serves a purpose in our society, while also being a significant public health concern, we need to look at the whole picture of what makes us human: the biology, the psychology, and my personal favorite, the sociology. So now I'm going to ask Maria to share a bit about her story and the biopsychosocial complexities that she experienced on her journey with addiction and mental illness.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just gonna fix this for me being a short person. There we go. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay. Louder. Got it. Okay. I hate mics, but so a little bit about me, but before I even start with that, I do want to give you all, even people online, a trigger warning, because I will be talking about my lived experience both with mental health and or addiction and all of that together. There'll be topics around, depression, anxiety, my substance use, abuse, suicide and related to that, family. So if you need to take a break and need to step out when I'm talking, do that. I'm not going to be offended by it. I just want to make sure that you take care of yourselves. And the people online too. You can walk away. And for myself, my story is, it has what I like to call it the perfect storm of both nurture versus nature. So my genetic background as well as how I was brought up and how that impacted me as a person today. I have a long history of addiction when it comes to with my family. In my maternal side, we don't like to talk about mental health and addiction, and therefore it's not a thing to discuss. and it's a very a hard topic for them to really comprehend due to also the cultural aspects of it. And also for my paternal side that I don't know much about, but what I do know is that my dad has a history and continues to use and abuse alcohol and has done so since I was born, maybe even going back, but that's what I know about my family history. What I also learned going through school, so I ended up going to school for child and youth counseling, specialized in mental health and addiction. And throughout all my studies, I realized that the paternal gene carries more than the maternal, which, okay, I mean, it makes sense. They got to balance each other out. But for me, it was a whole lot of crap. Why did I get to have all of the great genes and genetics that he brings to the table? Why can't I just, be normal? But that wasn't part of my journey, and I don't think there's such thing as normal. But when I find it, I will make sure to let everybody know how to get there. And for my biological side, because I didn't know much about it until I started to show and display symptoms and signs of addiction, I never necessarily knew what that would look like for me. Growing up, I developed a lot of anxiety and depression. And with that came, because I had immigrated to Canada, there was a lot of bullying happening. And trying to figure out who I am as a person, my identity, and I didn't necessarily know what was happening. And in my family with my mom, talking about my feelings was not a thing. I was either too dramatic, I was too emotional, and I needed to get over it. Words that you cannot tell a child how to feel when they can't even comprehend what's happening to them. And that wasn't very helpful, no matter how many years. And my mom, I'm 26, and she still says it till this day, and it still hasn't helped. And kind of walking through my journey, I needed to find a way to feel normal, to feel less of my negative emotions that I was experiencing. The lack of control, the lack of emotional stability that I was struggling with, not knowing what I was going to go home to and what my mom was going to say to me that was going to trigger me tremendously. And with all of that, I started to self-harm, which is also an addiction. It doesn't have to be substances, but that was my first addiction, was to self-harm. And going further on to my story, I discovered substances. And substances are very, like you were saying, some of them are acceptable. Some of them you see every corner, the LCBO. Otherwise, you celebrate and, we normalize it. And because that was normalized for me, that was my first access to that. And because I didn't know about my genetic predisposition, I realized that maybe I should be careful with that. Maybe I should know the signs of when am I abusing it or overusing it. Or if you keep going and escalate to different substances and or drugs, this is gonna become an issue because nobody told me any of this. All I knew is that my dad was a drunk person that was uncontrollable and used physical violence as a way to express himself. That's all I got. But if I knew more information as to, hey, my dad's an alcoholic, I would have made maybe smarter choices, or what I like to call informed choices. With that information, maybe things would have made a difference, who knows? But I won't know that because it's all in the past. But it would have been really beneficial for me to really understand where I was coming from. Also, going through the maternal side, because I heard a little bits and pieces of like my mom's history and my grandma's history and all of that, I realized that parenting is something that is taught. And same with how to people, right? We people by peopling. At least that's how I peopled. And with her, she never necessarily had that structure that she needed. And then there's heavy history of substance use and abuse and addiction in her family that nobody really talks about. It just happens here and there. Then I'm like, oh my God. Good information for me to know if I knew this earlier. Or, oh crap, like, you see, I'm not the only one that's up in this family, right? I can pull it like different people, and I'm like, you see, and now I get to joke about all of this because one, I cope with morbid humor. That's my new coping strategy. And two, it's because I need to figure out how to have all of this emotions and all of this and turn it into like a little bit of a comedy show. Because it's okay to laugh. It's okay to laugh at people's stories. No, not your people's story. My story. You can laugh at me. I can laugh at my own story. But all of the information is something that would have been essential for me to know. It would have shaped a lot of things, and it didn't need to wait till I was also in college when I was learning all of this. It would have made a lot of sense. And with my addiction, there was different phases to that. There was phases where I increased my use because of different circumstances that were happening. If I was going through a traumatic experience, and I've gone through a lot of them, but I remember, having been sexually assaulted, I needed to increase my use. There were periods where I thought that the way I was using was manageable for me. I was that person that was classified as a high-functioning addict. I don't understand how that can be a thing, but apparently it is. It was for myself, because nobody knew that I was struggling with addiction. I could still keep a job, keep relationships. I went to school. I did pretty much everything as a functioning addict, because there was always times where I would choose what players came into my system. And I was I thought I was like a genius for being able to discover this, that I could be like, be a high functioning addict and nobody would know, until people started to realize, and then I started to get in more and more problems. Then that became an issue. But I also went through pieces of being and using harm reduction strategies. Right? So not using necessarily the drug of choice that I would normally use, maybe replacing it with something else that has lesser effect and it's safer, because I'm never going to be safe if I'm using substances, but safer, and see how that would play out to keep myself safe. At the age of 16, I had attempted 5 suicide attempts. That's how my life was going. And I would never thought I would make it past my 20s. So it's a miracle that I am here today. And then when I was in my early 20s, I had overdosed 3 times already. I'm 26. So I feel like I'm a cat and I am running out of lives. So I need to get my shit together and to turn things around for myself. And I know that when I share my story, if I can impact just one person in the room or virtually, then I've done my job. And it's about educating, and throughout all of the things that we're going to be talking about, this is just a snippet of who I am and that how important that biological side of information that I missed out because parents didn't talk about it how that would have been such great information for myself to know, for my therapist to know. Like, this would have been great for Megan. Like, she would have been like, oh my God, this is great. I fixed you. And it would have saved, decades of therapy. Probably not. I don't think so. But having conversations like this with people is also really important to talk about and to know your history, because knowledge is power. And that way people can make their own informed decisions as to know like what they would like to do, what they don't want to do with their own bodies. So I'm going to pass it off to you again. We're going to shimmy. We didn't think this through. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing part of your story. I look forward to hearing and learning even more about you. So the next piece that we're going to move into is talking about the continuum, which sort of plays off of Maria's talking about the phases of her addiction and the experiences that she had, and using and not using, and then going into harm reduction and then not. So the one thing that has always inspired me to think more and do more was knowing that there were effective ways that we can protect against the harms of substance use that don't involve the unrealistic expectation of just say no, which is truthfully all I was ever told as a young person. In fact, there was this funny little jingle in the 1980s that I remember learning in school. Drugs, 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 some are good, some are bad. Drugs, 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 ask your mom, ask your dad. But my parents, like many parents, didn't know much about drugs, except to do what they thought was best and punish me for my curiosity and genetics. So I had to figure things out for myself. First, I did it experientially, then I went and got an education. Given that I'm here today, I'd say I'm pretty lucky that I had some supportive and influential people who helped me navigate the uncertainties of adolescence, and they were not my peers. Though I did love my friends, they were not the reason I was able to make it to adulthood. Some of it was me, and some of it was the adults in my life, including my mom, my grandparents, aunts, and some very special family friends who always gave me a safe place to go, no matter what kinds of shenanigans I was getting into. I also had a couple of really great teachers who helped me see my potential, especially when I felt like everything else in my life was heading in the wrong direction. I was lucky because these relationships and connections are what kept me from using substances too much. It's not to say that they were able to prevent me from using at all. Tonight, we're going to introduce you to the continuum of substance use, which you will see at various points throughout the mini-series. And it's important for us to think about these different kinds of use in different ways and be prepared to support and respond in different ways. Not all use is considered equal, and no use is not really a realistic universal goal, given that we have centuries of evidence showing that psychoactive drugs are part of human culture, and we have over a century of prohibition practices that have not been effective at substantially reducing or eliminating use. Nevertheless, we need to think about it in a different way. So on this spectrum here, you'll see that no use falls outside of the actual arrow. But it's still a really important group to think about. For one thing, we have to be aware that just because someone has never used or no longer uses, doesn't mean this will remain the case forever. Secondly, we can learn a lot from engaging in conversations with those who don't use by asking them about their experiences and their decisions not to use. Some might be genetic reasons, some might be they have no desire to feel different than what they currently feel like. There's lots of different reasons why people might not use. As a baseline estimate, in 2019, approximately 42% of Ontario students reported not using any drugs in the past year. Now, I'm not a terrible academic. I did try to look up the 2021, but they didn't report the abstinence measures. So assuming that the patterns are similar to the overall drug use patterns that were captured in the 2021 OSTIS, it is likely that this number is even higher now, because we're seeing a decline in substance use and increases in other things, like the amount of social media use. There's a sizable group of young people who are not using, and we can learn a lot from them. But it doesn't mean that they won't ever use any substances, because many people say that substance use is about a lack of connection. So the more and more we feel disconnected, the more likely it is we're going to see people using. Maybe not right now, but down the road. So when we look at the continuum beyond the abstinence or no use, there are many other possible types of use, not all of which are considered problematic necessarily. And in fact, most use is not problematic and is considered a normal response to the conditions. However, some levels of use do require more compassion, understanding, and intervention. This is something we'll return to in one of the upcoming talks in November. When we look at the continuum here, you'll see on the left side, it starts with beneficial use in blue. In terms of frequency and quantity of use, we could see this type of use as being similar to experimental, recreational, or even regular use. However, what makes this type of use different is the level of social acceptability and the authorities who deem that it's acceptable. So, generally, beneficial use includes things that have positive health, spiritual, or social impacts. It might include medicinal use, as prescribed, spiritual use, or perhaps moderate consumption of alcohol and cannabis. When we move further into the continuum, there's other non-problematic use, or typically non-problematic. This might include experimental use or recreational irregular use. It has minimal or negligible health or social effects. However, in both of these types of use, there's always a potential for harms to occur, such as overdoses, accidents, allergic reactions, interactions from mixing substances, the list goes on. As we progress into the yellow and red areas, this is where we tend to focus most of our attention and assumptions about the problems with substance use, even though people tend to confuse these stages with less risky and less frequent forms of use. Problematic use indicators typically include using at an early age or regular heavy use that has negative health impacts for individuals, families, friends, or society, which might include use by minors, impaired driving, binge consumption. And then on the far, far right, we have substance use disorders. Now, this is when an individual meets the diagnostic criteria set out in the DSM-5 and is clinically evaluated as having a disorder. We'll return to this later in a different session. What is important to realize at this stage is that different approaches are necessary for different people and even different types or levels of use. It's important to think about these things before reacting. So when we think about these things and try not to react, can you think of how you might respond to a 15-year-old youth who has just experimented with alcohol for the first time? You can do this either reflectively or put up your hand and participate. 15-year-old youth who's just experimented with alcohol for the first time. Yes?
It could go a couple of ways. It could be, wow, that was so cool, or, uh-oh, I'm throwing up. So it could, depending on your experience, it might be a, wow, this is really cool, or this wasn't very cool at all.
So in scenario number 1, where they thought it was pretty cool, how might you respond as an adult towards them?
They're underage. It's not appropriate. It's against the law. A conversation, what tempted you, try to unpack what led up to the use is how I think it would go about it. A conversation, non-judgmental, non-punitive, just what happened? You know, why are we here? Yeah.
There is no right or wrong answer, really. Everybody's going to be different. I just want to hear some ideas so that as we move forward in some of the future sessions, we can get a sense of communication and how people might be responding. Yes?
So in my household, I grew up with a father who is German, born and raised in Germany. So his culture, his heritage is alcohol is present when you're young. There is no legal drinking of it. So we were always exposed to, if you want to enjoy or you want to try it, then they would actually allow. Don't send the police to arrest them now, but the whole piece was, it was always an open conversation, and it was always an ongoing conversation, and even to the point where it also led into recreational drug use, marijuana smoking and all that sort of stuff. If you want to now, the limit was, we don't want you going out at the age of 13 and smoking or drinking. If you're going to drink, you have it with us, so that way we can ensure that you're safe. And if there was a point in time where we were going to experiment at all with marijuana, they had said that please don't drink until you're 18. That was the limit. That 18 was okay for an adult, but anything below that, they would, but alcohol was a completely different piece.
And to be expected, especially since the laws surrounding those things have only recently changed, right? So there's definitely a way in which parents deal with things differently depending on what the substance is. Yes?
I think it needs to be approached before they're 15. I think that subject needs to be brought up so that they can understand, they can come to you, that they have an open conversation. So that topic has already been talked about in a sense prior to that 15-year-old trying it.
That's a really good point to make too. And that's a bit of what we're going to get into very shortly is about how to start having, trusting, connected relationships as the first step. Yes?
I think I would respond by trying to find out if they have peers in their life that are pressuring them and sort of try to discuss it with them to see if I could overcome the pressures of their peers. I think I might also respond by keeping them in the house more, watching them more. So those are two responses. I think it's probably their idea of experimental use, that they just sort of wanted to check it out. And I wouldn't take it very seriously, and I wouldn't think it was very bad if they were just 15 and it was the first time. So I think that would be my response. That was your original.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate you saying that, because I think that the point that we're trying to make here is that depending on what it is that we're talking about, how old they are, what the substance is, all of these things need to be sort of fleshed out to have that conversation and to know that you're responding in an effective, productive, trusting, supportive way. This isn't to say, and I'll get into a little bit about the how we do this shortly, but I want to see if Maria wants to share a little bit more about the continuum and the different stages of use from her experience.
Thank you. So, like I said, for me in my use, it was very sporadic, and then there are some points that they were very packed together. I don't think I was ever outside of where I am right now, ever at the point of no use. There's always something in my system. It starts. For myself, it started with, I remember being in grade 9, and I wanted to be part of the cool people because I wasn't cool, and all the cool people were drinking and smoking. So then I was like, if this is how I get in, this is great. And then that's how I started. And I realized that when I had substances in my system, my anxiety was less. And then I noticed that people liked me more because I would talk more and I would just be more outgoing. So then that's how I also learned how to people, but in a negative way, was that, okay, I must be like this for people to like me then. So, that was a weekend and another weekend and then another weekend. And then till I said, let's try it out throughout the week. School week, let's see how this goes well with people, and it went really well. Hindsight, I shouldn't have gone that well, but I was just free from my anxiety, and I was free from all of my icky emotions that I was experiencing, especially in school where you spend like 8 hours. And if people and kids are being mean to you, those are the most excruciating hours of your whole entire existence at that point. But then I started using substances and this became great. So then I was able to tolerate it. And then with anxiety and depression and all of those were going down. And then when my mom asked me when I go home and she's like, how's your day? I'd be like, fantastic. That way she doesn't have to tell me you're so dramatic or just get over it. So it was fixing both problems. And at the end, I was starting to like myself even more. That was the experimental and recreational. And then I discovered that as an athlete, I used to do gymnastics for like decades. And you get into a lot of injuries. Now, this is how bad it got. So I'm 26. I have a new ankle that just happened. So I got new ankle, my ACL, my knee, my Achilles, my wrist. I had surgery on that, my toe, like surgery after surgery after surgery. And I learned that with surgery, drugs, bingo. So I milked it. I milked my injuries. Now, they were all serious. You know, I was getting my ACLs and my kneecaps and all of these things fixed. But I started to experience a new type of high that I wouldn't necessarily get in high school. You can, but it's rare. It's rare to get it in high school. So that's what I started using. So things really started to escalate very quickly, really, really, really fast, right? From drugs to now I'm looking at opioids. And it was, a heavy use. And then that's where I started to really feel like my identity had become attached to my drug use. People liked me more, therefore I liked myself. My emotions were non-existent at that point. I felt better, and then things at home were great because everything was fine in my life, so mom couldn't say anything about it. And then I went into college, and I discovered a whole new different type of drugs that would make me stay up all night. You understand what I'm saying? And that would be fantastic for me to get, all my education done and things like that. And staying up and being like, oh, I can do this. So my whole use, like I said, was very sporadic, and it escalated so quickly, so fast, but so intense with the amount of drugs that were introduced to me. And they fixed one problem of my life, that was my mental health and my family issues, until it did not, until my world fell apart and came crashing down. I didn't know that you can get kicked out of college. That was news to me. I'm paying for this, and I got kicked out in 7 weeks. Okay, yeah, try telling your mom that you got kicked out because you're an addict. And that the college is like, you need to get some treatment. Like, you're doing great at your job, but like, maybe you should figure your shit out before you help other people. So if my college is not saying this, I'm like, now I have to tell my mom. Now I can't pretend like I'm going to Toronto to not go to school. And so things in my life started to fall apart. My using became more consistent, that I would use in front of my mom, and that was a disaster. That is two storms coming together and just tearing each other apart. Mostly she tore me apart, but I'm sure being under the influence, I wasn't so nice either. And everything that I thought I had all together was not together anymore. Things were just coming down very fast. And where I am right now in this in the continuum is that I discovered the 12 steps. So I go to NA, so it's Narcotics Anonymous, and I practice abstinence. I knew that harm reduction, it's a fine line for me. I can definitely manipulate anything that I can to get what I want, which is a definition of resiliency, by the way. But we can talk about that after. And I started to really discover what a life without substance is. It was hell when you start off, when you start to put your whole identity and start to like tear it apart and figure out who is sober Maria, and I know that I don't like her. So how can we figure this out? So that's the path out of all of the continuums and trying things out and trying the harm reduction. And I do believe in harm reduction. And I do believe that in addiction, there is no, either you're full addiction or you're clean. I believe in harm reduction. It's what I practice when I'm supporting my clients. It's something that does not work for me. So I choose to do the 12 steps. And it has kept me clean for 4 years, and there was a lot of relapses though, because relapse is a part of recovery. It's definitely a part of my recovery. I did a lot of relapsing, a lot of Waikite, if anybody knows the NA or AA world or CA. But I was able to figure something that works for me. So I did the whole continuum. And not everybody goes through that. I just want to point that out. Some people just try it out and they're good. Others don't try it out at all, which seems like the answer. No, it's not. It seems like the answer for me. I wish I knew this. But that's my journey with my addiction in the continuum. Turn back to you.
Thanks again, Maria. I think I could just sit here and listen to her all night. All right, so what we're going to do now is get into the parenting stuff and the relationships and connections. So, it's really important that in order for us to address any form of substance use, that we examine the basics of building a foundation for healthy relationships, belonging, and connection. Families are an important social institution where children and youth should feel a sense of belonging and connection, and parents are centrally important in this, but so too are other adults in the community. Ultimately, how we parent and the experiences we have ourselves growing up has an impact on our ability to develop healthy attachments with our own children. And as parents, we are a reflection of our past and present circumstances. Healthy attachments with our own children and youth are extremely important for their development and their ability to be resilient to negative life circumstances, and there will be many. The good news is that we can all learn what works and what doesn't by looking at decades of research on attachment, parenting, and role modeling. We don't have to live by the mantra that when I was younger, my parents would have. Things change, and so does the knowledge and research that we have available to us. It's up to us to adapt. How we parent our children and youth has an impact on young people's abilities to successfully navigate through life decisions and transitions, including substance use. And when it comes to parenting, there's many ways we could respond. We can be strict and controlling, laid back or permissive with very little discipline, completely neglectful by not having any idea what's going on, or we can establish clear boundaries and allow young people the flexibility to be independent with support. I grew up with a pretty strict stepfather who thought abstinence from substance use was the only option, and any suspicions or confirmations of substance use besides cigarettes was dealt with quite punitively. In grade 9, I spent 6 months grounded for a series of bad choices I had made. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't being very safe about my choices, so I definitely needed to face some consequences. But I'm not sure that 6 months of grounding in the middle of nowhere was really warranted, and I didn't have much power to change that. During my half-a-year lockdown, a mysterious beer went missing from the fridge on a school day. You can probably guess who the prime suspect was. When I arrived at school, I was taken out of class, searched, and questioned by the police for one beer that to this day, I promise you, I didn't take. I had no idea what they were searching for or why I was the one being searched until I arrived home off the bus and was greeted with the accusation that I needed to let him know where the beer went. What do you think the effect was? And no, it's not. It leads you to get a PhD. That's what my husband said to me last night. Well, I got really good at hiding things. When I did decide to do something against the rules, and often found myself in dangerous situations, I had no chance of calling home for help. I had to figure things out for myself and hope that my parents never found out. And lucky for me, I had several other trusting adults in my life that I often relied on when I was in trouble. After I grew up and was on my own, I think my parents learned a lot, and my mom especially wanted to do things differently for my youngest brother. Kudos to them, I guess, for knowing that what I experienced was not ideal. When my youngest brother entered adolescence, my mother took on the lead of parenting, but she was much more permissive, and similar to when I was growing up, my parents were often unaware of what my brother was doing when he was out with his friends. As you heard in the beginning, this didn't turn out too well either. Well, I was certainly a handful, and I'll admit that. I wasn't being brought home by the police, throwing parties while my parents were out, or ruining their vehicle, doing stunts. My youngest brother, one of the kindest, most genuine people you will ever meet, experienced a much different form of parenting. Yet he spent the majority of his 20s struggling with substance use disorders and an undiagnosed mental illness that was no doubt exacerbated by his substance use. And don't be fooled, having a PhD does not mean things worked out fine for me. Remember what I said about trauma. It's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. So here's the thing. Being too strict can have negative consequences, but so too can being too lenient, especially if there's aspects of ignoring or being unaware of what's going on. If these two strategies of parenting aren't exactly ideal, then what exactly does work? Decades of research on attachment, parenting, delinquency, resiliency, and more recently trauma and adverse childhood experiences has collectively shown that children who grew up in nurturing, consistent, and authoritative environments are the most likely to lead healthier lives in the long term, including being able to potentially avoid the harmful effects of substance use. So what does it mean to be nurturing? It means being present, supportive, encouraging, and caring. All of this with the goal of developing healthy attachments and helping with the formation of their identities. Central to a nurturing relationship is acceptance and unconditional love. When we are accepted, we get a sense of belonging and meaning from our lives. We also feel more confident. It does not matter if we like or agree with what a child is expressing. We need to accept them for who they are and what they want to become, as long as we are upholding their safety, of course. Similarly, to love someone unconditionally doesn't mean we have to approve of choices or behaviors. It simply means that there are no expectations that the child must do or not do something in order to receive love. We need to show our children that they will be loved no matter what mistakes they make, what achievements they are awarded or aspire to, or what chores they may have forgotten. What does it mean to be consistent? Well, consistency means being predictable. establishing routines, and following through with what you say you will. We all thrive when we know what to expect from the day to day, and we have structure built into our daily lives. Routines can help us feel safe and secure, limiting uncertainty and unnecessary anxiety. They also help to build the foundation for quality time spent together. Research has consistently shown that youth and families who spend dinner together regularly experience less substance use and related problems. But it isn't about dinner. It's about the regular pattern of interaction that occurs and frequently being in the presence of one another. Spending time together consistently helps to establish a connection and trust. Go for a walk each day. Plan to chat. Whether this is while you're driving, whether it's over the phone, however you can do this, it's important. Eat a meal together or make a meal together. Cuddle or chat before bedtime. The possibilities for connection through the routines are going to be unique to every family, but the important part is being consistent and actually doing it regularly. If consistency is not something you've practiced up to this point, you can probably expect there will be some power struggles, especially if your kid's anything like me. The key is to keep trying, to be consistent about wanting to spend that time and establishing a routine. Eventually, it should get easier. However, if power struggles come about by changing or establishing a routine, then what you need to do is have a conversation with your child or your youth. What types of things would they like to start doing together on a regular basis? What kinds of consistent routines will they be able to establish? Give them some power and some choice. It's amazing how young people really do appreciate and thrive when they're given an opportunity to be a part of a process and have some agency. Which brings us to the authoritative parenting piece. Kind of sounds like being bossy and controlling, but that's actually the authoritarian type, the one that produces not so good outcomes, the my stepdad situation. Children should be seen and not heard in authoritarian households, whereas in authoritative households, parents are much more democratic in their parenting and encourage their children's independence by involving them in the process of interactions, either by explaining why rules exist or by allowing children to have some say in the creation of rules and appropriate consequences. Not only are authoritative parents nurturing and consistent, but they also set clear boundaries and have high expectations for behavior. They communicate warmth and acceptance to their children while also making it clear that there are limits and rules that they must follow. Rather than the old school authoritarian approach of some of our parents and perhaps grandparents, the do it because I said so types, authoritative parents set high expectations and explain why those expectations are in place. They also consistently ensure that they're being responsive to their children. By this, I mean they follow through with making sure expectations are met. Nagging is what my kids call it. And when those expectations aren't met, there are suitable consequences that follow. Extra dishes is what I tell them. I'm just kidding. There's lots of things. Authoritative parents exercise a significant amount of control. Like authoritarian parents, they have control, but authoritarian parents are coercive and sometimes use force, which removes the agency from the individual. Authoritative parents confront the issues with authority, loving respect, and address the child's needs. When it comes to social relationships, authoritative parents generally know what their children are doing when they're away from home and who they're associating with. My one daughter calls this helicopter parenting. They also have clear boundaries around curfews, screen time, homework, bedtime, the time spent with friends, the time spent with family, chores. I'm sure you get the point. There's lots of expectations, but expectations help us become better people. When we have no expectations, we don't know what to do with ourselves. However, having the power to implement these strategies with our children and youth isn't something that happens overnight, and certainly depends on a child's temperament. Some children and youth are much easier than others. What remains constant, however, is our responsibility to develop connection and trust. We can start with acceptance, unconditional love, establishing routines, and setting boundaries and expectations. We'll return to more strategies for building connection and trust when we discuss resilience and communication in future sessions. For now, what's important to emphasize is that young people learn how to navigate the world and their relationships from what they see and experience around them. This doesn't mean that they directly imitate everything they see, but it does mean that what they see they use to shape into their own understanding and experience. If they are surrounded by consistently negative influences with few positive and supportive role models, if they lack nurturance, consistency, and a trusted authoritative figure in their lives, there's a pretty good chance that they will do what they know best and turn to those who will support and encourage them, most often their peers. While peers are an important part of young people's social lives, they do not offer the same unconditional love, acceptance, and developmental maturity that we can and should expect from the adults. If youth are surrounded by positive adult role models and have at least one secure attachment to a caregiver, they're going to feel a sense of discomfort and responsibility when they know they might make a decision that may compromise that relationship. And more importantly, they'll feel more connected knowing that they have someone they can turn to if they find themselves in trouble. In sociology, Travis Hershey calls this a stake in conformity. He argues that we all have the capacity to do things that are risky or a violation of social norms, but the strength of our social bonds are what keep us from doing things that might be otherwise fun, thrilling, dangerous. In other words, if youth have nothing to lose, no attachments to compromise, no role models to disappoint, and they feel disconnected from conventional society, then there's no stopping substance use from starting, and there's certainly an increased risk of substance use becoming more problematic. Now, the interesting thing about substance use is that it has become somewhat normalized in our culture. Even though, as parents and concerned adults, we might see substance use as problematic for youth and their developing brains, the messages that they're getting from their social relationships and the broader culture is that substance use is a rite of passage and almost accepted. However, as Gabor Mate would argue, just because something is considered normal doesn't mean it's healthy or in fact normal. This makes it even more important for us to have more open and honest conversations with youth about substance use and their well-being, while also appreciating and understanding that some youth are still going to use, no matter how hard we try, to do all the right things to help them, and that's okay. So now I'm going to see if Maria would like to share a little bit more of the relationship side.
So for me, learning about the attachment styles in school was like the biggest revelation that I could ever have in my education, because it really explained everything that I was experiencing at home and how important that was and that is for children who are developing. I have a brother, and he's 7 years older. Well, one, he's a male. Two, he has 2 masters, one in civil engineering specialized in soil. Okay. And then the other one, I don't know. I don't know what it is. But 2 masters. He makes tons of money because of what he does at work. Can't relate. And he gets along well with my mom and my family. Now you have me, who obviously is mentally ill. I was also an addict, who was a difficult child, who does not have any masters or PhDs. Yeah. I missed that one. And I was the one that decided to go to college, which apparently was the end of the world for my mother. I like my job. My brother, not so much. But I'm not keeping score or anything. But when you look at, yes, we're 7 years apart, but when you look at how we were raised and brought up together, you see completely 2 different attachments. I don't have any attachment. I have like super insecure attachment. I can't trust people. Nobody's ever been consistent in my life. And my brother's is very secure. Like it's really funny because his partner, she's like highly anxious, and she brings him like, he provides her security, which I find funny because my brother is like super, super scary to look at and to live with. So I'm like, oh, look, that's funny. How ironic. Can't relate, but I'm glad somebody's getting that assurement. But because I was already, born with a lot of fun genes from my paternal side, my mom did not necessarily know how to deal with me. My brother, easy peasy. Like, cookie cutter, you feed him, he's good, he's smart, like everything. So my mom didn't have to worry about raising him. And she thought that because he's older, she could just copy and paste and do that what she did for me to him, and maybe we'll like be the same. It didn't work. I'm a disappointment. And with that, I always say that growing up, I thought that my mom was a horrible parent. And then I learned as I, began to heal, and my inner child began to heal, I realized that there's no such thing as bad parents. They just don't know how to parent, right? Just like I learned how to people, my mom learned how to be a mom, seeing her mom. And my grandma, she is the most like strict, rigid human the whole entire planet. Like it's do it, you must do it. What did you say? Yes, that. She's that type of person. And my mom learned that, and therefore, her parenting skills aren't the best. But for the way I describe parents, especially my situation, is that everybody has a toolbox, right? Tools, coping skills. But my mom in her toolbox, she only had a hammer. And for my brother, a hammer was stellar. Like that worked wonders, clearly. For Maria, I needed a screwdriver, but she only had a hammer. You cannot, those two, you can't make them work. They did more damage than good, but that didn't mean she didn't try her best. And that was, for me, a fascinating thing to learn and also to accept, that my mom tried her best. It's not like she didn't try. It felt like she didn't try. She said awful things to me. She continues to say awful things to me, but she keeps trying, right? She, in her own way, she feels like she can continue to try and maybe something will click from her hammering. And that's fine. But that relationship really determined how I saw my next relationships and the relationship I had with myself. And none of them were pretty. And it really enabled and jumpstart the ship of the perfect storm, mental health and addiction. All of those things that were just brewing, my mom just happened to be just open the gates. And that's how that happened. I believe that parents who are willing to learn how to deal with their kids and who are willing to change with their kids shows a lot of courage, shows a lot of bravery. Because I know that my mom, when my therapist was saying the same thing, my mom got really defensive. As a parent, why are you questioning my parenting skills? And that wasn't that. It was asking, hey, your daughter's saying she's hurting. how can we help her? And if any of you are parents in this room and you're here, well, you're doing everything that my mom never did, because she walked out of therapy multiple times, or any of these things that I brought her to. So you are already doing the first step that would have helped 12-year-old Maria learn how to navigate the world of what it is like to be an addict growing up. And I think that that's very important. So kudos to you if you are a parent, and you're here. I highly admire it. And I wish I had a parent that did that for me. But I really think that it's very important to talk about and to discuss attachment. And if you want to do some light reading, if you look at the attachment theory, and you really go through more in depth, because there's a lot more about each style and each style of parent you may be. Information is knowledge, right? So with this information, you can do an informed decision, an informed change to help your child overcome whatever they're overcoming. That's it.
You're awesome. All right. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. And I agree with Maria. I'm really happy to see people in the room that are here wanting to learn, and people online that are wanting to learn and hear more about this. And as we go through this series, there's going to be a lot of different things that we cover. So today's focus was mostly on setting the stage, but also on the attachments and parenting and the different things that we can do to set the best foundation we possibly can. So in terms of where do we go from here, I hope throughout this evening you've had the chance to learn something new and reflect on some of the knowledge and experience we've shared with you. I wanted to leave you with some final thoughts before we take a break and move to the Q&A panel portion of the evening. And so the final thoughts essentially are that we need to devise youth-informed ways of making meaningful connections with young people in the community, in our families, and in our schools. We also need to recognize the role that we play in encouraging and preventing harms of substance use among youth. And this is not about blame or shame, as Maria was alluding to. It's about developing stronger bonds with our children and youth so that they can have the best chances in life. We need to give young people boundaries and realistic expectations, but also encourage their need for agency. And last but not least, we need to accept and support those who do make the decision to use. It's misleading to think that we can ever completely eliminate substance use, so we need to come up with better and more effective ways to delay use, minimize the harms, and reconnect with our youth. And we can do this through actively engaging them in meaningful conversations about their use. No blaming, no shaming, just listening, learning, and supporting. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. That was really quite an incredible journey that we just went on, and I've been in this business for quite some time, and it never ceases to amaze me. I still have so much more to learn. So thank you both very, very much for sharing and working so hard on this presentation. Many golden nuggets for sure. So at this time, we have collected some of the questions that you may have had that either brewed from the presentation, or maybe you came in with these questions. So we're going to try to unpack some of them, and we're going to do our very best to do so. But understand, some of these questions are very complex, but we're going to try to either answer the question as best we can and or direct you to other resources that might give you more in-depth information that will dig deeper into the question you're looking for. But I think they're all really great questions, really fantastic. Thank you so much for doing them. If you have a question that you are comfortable with asking in person, just let me know by raising your hand and I can come over and we can ask the question together. But we thought we'd give the option of writing them down on a piece of paper. So I hope that all makes sense. Okay? Great. First, I'd like to start off by introducing our panel. And first on our panel, we have Mary. And Mary is with St. Leonard's. St. Leonard's Mental Health and Addiction Services. So welcome, Mary. Yay! Next on our panel, we have Piali Bagshi. Piali works with the Grand Erie District School Board as the manager for mental health services. Welcome, Piali. Next on our panel, we have Diane Dovchuk. Diane Dovchuk is the mental health lead for the Brant Haldeman Norfolk Catholic District School Board. And next on our panel, I'd like to introduce Charlotte. And Charlotte is with Woodview, Woodview's Mental Health and Autism Services, servicing Brantford. Welcome. And next, of course, needing no introduction, we have Maria Estrada, a person with lived experience. Welcome, Maria. And joining us as well is Dr. Tara Bruno. Just Dr. Tara Bruno. Okay. So here's a question, and the question, I understand what the intent of the question is. Is it true that if we give our children too many choices, this will trigger a fight or flight response in children? If we give them too many choices, will this trigger a fight or flight response in children? I'm not entirely sure where we're going with the question. Too many choices can leave some ambivalence as to what to do. Would anyone like to try and elaborate on that concept of too many choices? Just a minute.
So when we talk about the fight, flight, or freeze response, generally we're talking about that stress response, right? That stress response that initiates within that the limbic system of the brain. So the brain thought of sort of as, sort of really in the center of the brain with the prefrontal cortex sort of over it. In general thinking, the flight, fright, or freeze response comes out of a stress response. So something's happened in the environment. It's a very adaptive response. It's a normal response. And depending on what it is, we may feel that we may need to leave. We may need to go as soon as we can. We may sort of, depending again on what that is, we may sort of move into that place of, no, I'm standing my ground and I'm going to be defiant and oppositional and I'm going to take this on. Or we may be so overwhelmed that we just move into this place of catastrophic sort of freezing. We can't respond. So choice in flight and fright. Choice in general is in this topic that we're talking about with parenting, with substance use. But let's just go back to parenting and Dr. Bruno's conversation tonight about, I'm taking a long time with this, with authoritative, or laissez-faire sort of parenting. In general, choice is important. It has to be age and stage appropriate, of course, but it is important. Too many choices can be overwhelming for anyone, regardless of age and stage. But that notion that you're saying, okay, you're upset about something, what would you like? Like, just to elicit that response and see what choices the child has about whatever maybe the conflict is usually a good idea, and then to guide through those choices. Big answer to your question, but hopefully I answered what you needed.
Excellent answering. Thank you, Piali. We will be in the mini-series moving forward. We are going to look more about how the brain works, how substances impact the brain, the triggering process that Piali just explained. We are going to unpack that in much more detail in the subsequent series, the fight, flight, or fright response. So the next question is, how do we differentiate between safe places to go and people who support us and enabling? How can we know which one we're doing in terms of, is this a safe place to go and I'm being supported, or am I an enabler? Anybody feel like taking that one on? Okay. Let's go, Mary.
Thank you. I think that a safe place, like Tara mentioned, has expectations and still support, but still has those expectation pieces where I think an enabling piece wouldn't have so many more expectations per se from somebody, but that's I think the key difference between the two is having that safe, supportive environment with some expectations rather than letting a youth make choices that maybe are putting them at risk or in dangerous situations.
So I heard a little bit about some parameters and consequences related to it. So you provide a welcoming, safe space, but then you have a conversation about, okay, now where do we go from here? That's very different from enabling, right? Is that great? Okay. The next question that we have is on the topic of biology or genealogy. And is it potentially true that alcoholism skips a generation? Does anybody, that's a very science-specific question, and I'm not sure if we're equipped with the answer to that today, but we can certainly look at it and maybe bring it into another time. No?
I just feel offended that I didn't skip my gene.
Is this where I can say it's complicated?
Yeah, that's what I want to say. Yeah, it's complicated.
I mean, the general pattern is that it does more so come down the male genetic line, for sure, in terms of alcohol use and dependence. I'm sorry. But in terms of skipping a generation, we get into the conversation about what is a predisposition versus what is something that will, in fact, lead to alcoholism. The environment is central there. So in terms of skipping a generation, it's complicated because you could be up next, just like twins, having baby twins. They say that skips a generation, but there's possibilities in the environment that can sort of mitigate that and change that trajectory.
A predisposition does not equal a predetermination. Is generally the rule of thumb that I go by and scientists support. Okay, thank you very much, Tara. Is it generally accepted that early childhood trauma can contribute to substance use later on in life? Is it generally accepted that early childhood trauma or abuse can contribute to substance addictions and misuse disorders?
No, I was just going to say that it's exactly the same with that. It's complicated answer. It's that if you don't necessarily have to have a trauma that will automatically gear you towards like addiction. It's something that it's a high possibility of it. And we talk about the ACE study. the adverse childhood experiences. I call it VA studies. My bad. And we kind of talk more about that. But yes, it's very complicated. So I guess the answer would be like yes and no. It really depends on who you are, where you are, how you're brought up, nature versus nurture.
Well done for complicated. Are there any questions from the audience that you would like to ask? Oh, here's one. Thank you. Okay, so here's the question. How can we better work with our medical professionals who prescribe medication which can potentially lead to substance misuse as a parent, and or how to advocate accordingly? Great question.
So I actually, like I said, I had my first ankle ligament reconstruction 6 months ago. And as a person that is sober and clean, I really had to navigate this appropriately. I know that a lot of people that are in recovery do opt in with any narcotics, depending on their support system. For myself, I knew that that wasn't going to be an option, and there was no negotiating that. So I really needed to advocate for myself and to be honest and transparent with my doctor in regards to like, hey, I'm a recovering addict. I know that the surgery is gonna really be painful, but how can we navigate with that? A lot of the doctors are now learning that addiction and surgery or any medical procedure that requires opioids can be monitored and or dangerous. And my surgeon was very open to finding different ways to really navigate how my surgery was going to go and how my recovery was going to go. So if it was, I needed to stay in the hospital for a day to get the IV opioids to help me, because it was with a nurse and that was going to monitor me, then that was fine. And then it's like, okay, he only gave me, I think, like 5 different Percocets, and it was like he called me every single day and he checked up on me and he made sure that I had people around me and things like that. Now for myself, I decided to have like a buddy system, but it was my partner that came with me to the office, and we made sure that the plan was laid out, because knowing that I was born an addict, I will die an addict. I always say that, and I know that my addiction is doing like push-ups outside of the parking lot right now. And that if this moment was going to make me feel really vulnerable, that I needed to step up my game in regards to my recovery. So that way I brought like a third-party witness as to what the plan was and how we were going to manage that. Going back to the first question about the options, for myself and anybody that has lived experience with either mental health and or addiction, and trauma, your power has been stripped away at a very young age. And not giving people options is empowering them and giving them their power back. So for bringing my partner or my doctor giving me different options, it really made me feel like I had my power back in my own recovery. And throughout my life, I make sure that, or people make sure that I get to have options and I get to make the decision that's best for myself, giving that my power back and not that it's being taken away from me like it did when I was a kid.
Thank you very much, Maria. That was really fantastic for sharing. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap that up for now. There was a few other questions that were highly pharmacologically based, and in this forum, those complex type questions really need to be addressed by a physician. And so I'm going to shelve those questions. If you ask them about some pharmacology questions, aka drugs, what they do, what are alternatives, and so on, you can speak to me later, and I can help you navigate getting the answers that you need. But this is not, I'm not able to facilitate those medical questions at this time. So we are going to wrap this up and thank our panel very much.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone here, for joining the panel, answering the questions. So very grateful to have you all here tonight and answering our questions. If there were any questions, again, that we couldn't get to, you can write it down in your evaluation or leave it with us, and we can definitely get that back to you. So this concludes our first session of the Drugs and Youth, What Adults Need to Know mini-series. We have 4 more sessions. Our next one is October 19th. It's the same place, here at the Civic Center, or online, same time, the same Strode's dinner, maybe a little different, but Strode's will be here. Our marketplace vendors, and we're really looking forward to see you all. For in-person participation, it is a little bit tedious. You do need to register for each individual date, so make sure you register if you're coming back. For our virtual attendees, it's just a one and done sign up, so we hope to see you as well for our next sessions. And again, I really can't thank everyone enough for joining us tonight, and especially to Dr. Tara Bruno and Maria. It was wonderful to have you both. I hope they have left you on a positive note, feeling very empowered and intrigued for what we have next for the mini-series. So again, I'd just like everyone to thank everyone up here and get home safe, and we will see you in October.
Thank you.